Welcome, folks. You've joined the National Watershed Coalition webinar today on unlocking the Emergency Watershed Protection Program Strategies for Success. We're glad that you could join us today, and we still are a little bit ahead of time here. So let me just speak to a couple of things logistics wise. You'll be using the question and answer area on your Zoom dashboard for questions, answers, comments, that sort of thing. We won't be using the chat nor the hand raising for questions and answers. That allows us to be able to have a questions and answers report at the end. Also, our presenters will be able to type in answers to your questions live. Uh, Oftentimes we get asked the question, will we be recording? Yes, we will be recording, but you're going to get the most out of staying with us right through live because the questions and answers that are answered behind the scenes, you might say, that are coming in and being answered by our presenters will not be a part of the recording. So you're going to get the most out of this if you stay on live with us throughout the entire activity. We had 44 representatives from 44 states, about 200 that had registered for the event today. So welcome. You've joined the National Watershed Coalition, Unlocking the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, Strategies for Success. Be waiting for our folks to join us, our participants to join us. The voice you're hearing is Ray Ledgerwood, your facilitator for today's webinar. Welcome, folks. You've joined the National Watershed Coalition webinar on Unlocking the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, Strategies for Success. I'm going to give it a couple minutes here, past the mark, to make sure our attendees, our participants are getting signed in and getting ready, settled in, and ready for our webinar today. Give it another minute or two to make sure that our attendees are up and ready to go. Good morning, folks. You've joined the National Watershed Coalition webinar on Unlocking the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, Strategies for Success. The voice you're listening to is Ray Ledgerwood, the moderator for today's webinar. Our webinar ID is 884-698-3580. I'll leave that up on the screen in case you need to re-enter that or write that down just in case you're disconnected. All the lines are going to be muted except for the presenters today. Just our presenters will be unmuted today. We're going to handle the questions via the web using the Q&A Zoom feature on your computer Zoom dashboard. So go to the computer Zoom dashboard. You can open up that Q&A area. If you don't see it right away, go over to the three dots and hit that and you'll find that question and answers area. That's how we're going to handle questions today. And we're going to do that because we're going to get to as many questions as we can, some of which we're going to have verbally answered, and some will have answers that will be entered into that Q&A area on your behalf. So our presenters can go ahead and type in answers as we're going along throughout the presentation today. Yes, the webinar will be recorded, but let me remind you, you're going to get the most out of this webinar if you're participating with us, and some of the Q&A will not be on the recording. So if you were thinking about just turning off your machine, don't do that. Stay with us the entire time. Enjoy this webinar with us. Feedback is welcome. The kudos, comments, recommendations all go to Ray Ledgerwood at msn.com. Now, during the course of the event, we're hoping to be able to do a poll with you. And so in order to join that poll, just make mention that you would go to menti.com, either on your computer or your cell phone, either way, and then use the code 22436179. Now leave that up there just for a shake or two here while you write that down. Let me encourage you to grab something to write these things down and these particular numbers, menti.com. Use this code. All right, our presenters will be using that technology with you today. It's my pleasure to introduce our chair of the National Watershed Coalition, Tina Hendon. Tina, are you with us?
I am. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us. I am Tina Hendon, chair of the National Watershed Coalition. And before we get started, I wanted to share just a little bit about the NWC, who we are and what we do. First, who we are. We have a great leadership team in place, including Jean Sawborn from West Virginia, Lisa Knopf Owen from Oklahoma, Barb Olgen from Kansas, and of course, Dr. Dan Sievert, also from Oklahoma. Next slide. Part of what we do. So we were formed in 1989, and our membership is made up of national, regional, state, local organizations, associations, and individuals. And to those folks, we provide expertise and consultation to our members, project sponsors, partner organizations, such as the National Association of State Conservation Agency, and of course, USDA NRCS staff. The NWC also partners directly with USDA NRCS through a cooperative contribution agreement. This includes a number of activities that benefit both the agency and watershed sponsors across the country, producing educational materials, doing webinars, on-site trainings, and we're currently working on a new 2-year agreement to continue this partnership. Next slide. Some of the recent accomplishments that have come out of the agreement and other activities. Over the last couple of years, we've hosted 8 webinars that reached more than 1,500 people, and this series, of course, is going to add significantly to those numbers. Some of the topics that we've covered include funding projects, inspections, easement basics, selling watershed and conservation work, and of course, these webinars are recorded and available on our YouTube channel. All right, some of the resources. Let's see. Yeah, some of the resources, in addition to the Facebook page, are also available through our website and YouTube and Facebook. These include fact sheets on a host of projects and topics, write-ups on many successful stories from across the nation. And now our website allows folks to register and pay dues and register for meetings and pay for those meetings online, which is a great advancement. And please like us on Facebook to get alerts and news directly to your feed. And these are the ways you can contact us, interact. We would love to know what you like, what you want to see more of, want to hear about your stories and ideas. And thanks for joining us today. I hope everybody is able to take away some new knowledge and tips that benefit your program.
Thank you, Tina. And one of the things that's usually a question that we have, and we can cover this again during the webinar, but the recording will go up onto that website after it's processed and put back up there. And usually takes a couple of weeks, doesn't it, Dan, if I remember right? Get that No
Yeah,
problem.
right. Usually 7 to 10 days.
All right, thanks so much. All right, for an overview then, let's go to Dr. Dan Siebert, our Executive Director, National Watershed Coalition. Dan?
Thanks, Ray. Welcome, everyone. This is one of a series of webinars that are aimed at assisting both our NRCS partners as well as watershed project sponsors across the country to utilize the program in an efficient and effective manner. The Watershed Coalition's most important resource is our members, and we would invite you to join us. Through our members, we're able to provide services such as the webinar today. Today's webinar about EWP, I think, is very important because we don't think a lot about EWP until that event comes along where we need it. We're very pleased to partner with Jones and DeMille on this webinar. We appreciate the support that NRCS has provided. Jose is here as a resource to answer questions from an official perspective. So with that, I think we should get things rolling. Again, we're glad you're here. If there's anything that we can be of service to you about or with, please do feel free to contact us. Appreciate your presence today.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that very much. Our purpose today is to unlock the EWP program, Strategies for Success. We're going to have an in-depth exploration of the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, and our experts will guide you through essential strategies, practical tips, and best practices to overcome common challenges to equip you for success in every aspect of the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. So get ready, buckle up, get some paper to write with and something to write with. Now, a couple of things logistically that I want to cover with you. One is that we're going to use the question and answer dashboard today for your communication back and forth with the presenter. So don't use the chat. That's not going to be monitored that well. But do use the questions and answer system, which will be monitored throughout the webinar. The hand raise will not work either. It'll work, but we're not going to call on you and have you verbalize your answer. We'll just have the question and answer area on your dashboard, have that open and have that ready to go. All right. So again, just to repeat it, questions and answer areas where we're going to have our answers by presenters. They'll do some of it verbally, they'll do some of it in writing. All right, it's my pleasure then to introduce our first presenter who is actually going to do the presenter introductions today. It's Darren Robinson. He's a professional engineer, principal of Jones and DeMille Engineering Incorporated. Darren? And we'll unmute Darren there in our conference area at Jones and DeMille. There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, Ray?
Got you good. Yep. Thank you.
All right. Great. Yeah, thanks, Ray. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of our team, I'd just like to express our appreciation and excitement for this opportunity. We've enjoyed over the last 7 or 8 years the opportunity to work across the Western region with about 10 different states, completing projects for the NRCS using several of their programs. And then prior to that in Utah here, going back to 2003, we've had the opportunity to complete numerous EWP projects. And so we're just hoping we can share some of our experience and lessons learned and whatnot today from that experience. And so I'll go ahead and introduce our team here. To my right, we've got Parker Bursmack. He's a water resources engineer. He's managed and also a project manager, managed multiple EWP projects, mainly across Utah. And then Jason Dodds here, he's a NRCS engineer and EWP program manager for Utah. We've worked with him and we wanted to have a well-rounded group that could speak both from the engineer and practitioner side and also from the NRCS perspective to share our thoughts today. And then Jenna Jorgensen. She's our NEPA coordinator, and we like to affectionately refer to her as our NEPA ninja. She keeps us engineers in line and aware of the NEPA process and the appropriate scheduling and whatnot to make things move more smoothly. Online, we have Eric Major. He's our another project manager and water resources engineer in another area at the northeast corner of the state. And he too has a lot of great experience with EWP projects. And in addition to our team here, we also have Jose Rosada. He resides out in Nevada. He's the National Emergency Protection Program coordinator for the NRCS. And so he's been a resource to review and make sure we're speaking from the right book and the right doctrine here. So he'll be a resource to us as we see questions come in and whatnot. So that's our team, and like I say, we're excited to. And our purpose for this is just to hopefully help some of you folks out there answer some questions and share some of our experiences.
So like we mentioned earlier, we do have a poll that we hope to use. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and log into menti.com on the internet, either your phone or computer, and then use the code 22436179. We'll go ahead and give folks just another minute or so to do that, and then we'll move forward with some poll questions. And as we scroll through the slides too, that code will be present on the top of each slide. So if you miss it here, look for it on the upcoming slides. And maybe with that, we'll just roll into the next question. We've got a bunch of answers already, and again at the top of the page, there's a code there.
All right, this is Jason Dodds with the NRCS, and kind of the purpose of these questions is to get your mind thinking. They're questions that we get asked a lot as NRCS employees, and so there's going to be some we may not give you answers yet, but hopefully as we go through our slides, you'll better understand the answers. So the first one is what does DSR stand for? Looks like we've got a lot of people already coming in. We have don't serve refreshments, damage sustained report, damage survey report, and dam spillway refusal. We're going to go ahead and click the correct answer. It is damage survey report. So next slide here. Select 2, EWP funds may be used for. So things we can use funds for: obstruction removal from a channel, rebuilding a road along a channel, bank stabilization around an existing culvert, removal of sediment from a hospital post-flood. Some good stuff there. People are going to ask, can we do these things? All right, correct answer right there. Bank stabilization around an existing culvert and obstruction removal from a channel. Next one. Get some time to load here. EWP funds may not be used for protecting a road that washed out every spring, rebuilding dilapidated irrigation structures, installing a culvert for a single access road, protecting a wine grape and orchard, or a wine grape orchard. And E would be all of the above. It looks like we're slamming in a lot of all of the above, which is the correct answer. Next question. You guys already know everything. We're not going to have much to say. Select 2. EWP sponsors are responsible for A, project permits, operation and maintenance for only 1 year following project completion, providing 25% matching funds or in-kind value. All right, this one we've got it mixed up a little bit. Let's see. Okay, project permits and providing the matching funds. Next slide. EWP allowable match items may include sponsor provided labor and equipment, sponsor source permitted construction materials, riprap, fill, etc. FEMA funded property acquisition. All right, correct answer. We should have said select two, but there we go. Two of those things, we can't get the FEMA property acquisition. Next one. Like I said, you're probably gonna have some questions. Hopefully we answer those questions as we roll through. We're gonna take a quick peek.
Very good, Jason. It looks like, Parker, it looks like we've not gotten any questions in yet. Just to remind the folks, now the Q&A area is on your Zoom area, your Zoom control box there on your computer. So go ahead and answer, or go ahead and put in your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So we'll just move on right now, and we'll keep monitoring for our participants' questions. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, we're gonna do a quick EWP overview. EWP program, its inception was in 1978. We've had expenditures in 2023 of $925 million for projects across the country. So you can see this is a large program for the NRCS, and it's very useful for local governments to be able to access those funds. Next slide here. So most of this stuff I want to put a plug in comes directly out of the EWP manual. It's actually, I have to say, it's one of the easiest manuals to read. I'm not much of a manual reader, and I've read this multiple times all the way through. It's got great information. It's very clear. So if you have questions, I always tell people, let's go to the manual, and you can almost always find it. I personally have lots of areas highlighted. As I go to questions, if I have questions, I highlight it. A lot of times they come back again. They're useful for sponsors when they ask questions. Why can't we do things? We can just send them parts of the manual to say why we can't. So the program objective is emergency recovery measures. We want runoff retardation and erosion prevention. We want to mitigate imminent hazards to life and property. This is a big one when we're dealing with EWP. We always want to ask, how are we mitigating hazards to life and property? The fourth one is natural disasters cause a sudden impairment of the watershed. So for it to be eligible for EWP, we have to have that impairment. So it has to be tied back to an event. If we hit the next slide, we'll chat a little bit more about this later, but things to keep in mind. So the first thing we need is a sponsor. When we have an EWP, we have an event, an impairment of the watershed, we need to get that sponsor. Private entities are not eligible as a sponsor, but they are eligible for assistance through qualified sponsors. So qualified sponsors are generally a local government, an Indian tribe or tribal organization. They must have legal interest in the values threatened, which means if it's in one county, we can't get another county to sponsor this project. They have to be willing and able to obtain land rights. They have to be willing and able to perform operation and maintenance, and they also must be willing and able to provide a 25% match. There are situations with limited resources where we only have a 10% match required by the sponsor. But generally speaking, it's a 25% match, and sometimes that really drives the project. So timeline, how does this work? First off, we get an application. The state conservationist must receive an application for assistance from a qualified sponsor within 60 days of the disaster. So again, there has to be an impairment, whether it's a flood, whether it's a fire. We need to get that application within 60 days. The next is the NRCS will do a site visit and a damage survey report. Generally, it's NRCS staff that goes out. They review the area, they review the potential issues, and they fill out this damage survey report, which is where we estimate the amount of funds that it'll take to deal with the issues we have, the flooding, the possible flooding, and mitigate risk to life and property. Funding availability. This is the one that's variable. It's kind of an unknown timeline because Congress must fund the EWP program. So sometimes there's money in that account. And at that, if there is, it's generally a 30-day return, 30 to 60-day return period, fairly quick. If there's not, it can be months waiting for Congress to fund that. Now, we want to make a point that if there isn't funds available, we still, the sponsor should still request the funds because it shows a need for this program. So if you ask the NRCS office, is there money available? And they say no, don't just withdraw your application. Once we get funding, the state, that starts a clock of 220 days. This is important because we want to have all our construction completed 220 days from that time period. So to be able to make that happen, we need that sponsor. If we're going to deal with a consultant to do the design, or if the NRCS is going to do the design, that needs to be a decision that's made up front and quick and very quickly. If they're going to select a consultant, that also needs to be done very quickly. That 220 days sounds like a long time, but the reality is we have a lot to do in that in a relatively short period of time. Construction, again, the construction must be completed prior to the expiration of the agreement. When we enter into these EWP contracts, there'll be an expiration date, and we want to have our construction completed at that time. Next slide here. So eligibility.
Before you go on, Jason, if I might break in, this is Ray.
Sure.
Back to that last slide, we had a nice question that came in. I just want to make sure that everyone had the opportunity to hear it. So the question was, is it 60 days from the date of the incident or 60 days from the date of the disaster declaration? And Jose was kind enough to answer that with us, 60 days from the event or 60 days from when the site is accessible. Is that consistent with what you're thinking too, Jason?
Yes, yep, that's exactly straight from the manual. 60 days, yep, from the event or access.
And I know that in many of the registration questions you mentioned, and you mentioned in your opening comments, the importance of that manual as a good reference for a question and answer. But thanks for the question and answer. And thanks, Jose, for opening that up. Is there a link for the EWP manual the speaker referenced? And I bet that we can probably get that from Jose. So continue on. Thanks a lot, Jason, for letting me break in.
Yep. So program eligibility, this is where we need to make sure, again, we're tying things back to the manual, making sure we're doing things that are not ineligible. First off, we have to have an emergency. So again, a natural disaster of some sort causes an impairment to the watershed. So we want to be dealing with water, flood, those type of things with the CWP. And a sudden impairment occurs and it creates an imminent threat to life and property. It can't be something that happens every year. A lot of times I get called out and say, oh, we have this road, it washes out every single year, we're tired of it. Can EWP fix it? If it happens every year, automatically that's no. There wasn't a sudden impairment to the watershed, there wasn't a fire, there wasn't an abnormal flood, so the answer is no. Project protects life and property. Now, property is one of those things we have people ask about a lot, and that ties back to the vineyard. Property, according to the manual, is an artificial structure permanently affixed to the land. So a house, a road, pipelines, those type of things are property. My alfalfa field is not property. It cannot be used to repair, rebuild, maintain private or public transportation facilities, utilities, or similar facilities. So we can protect those things and we can restore that hydraulic function, but we don't rebuild them. The sponsor or some other entity must rebuild those, and then we can come and protect those from future flooding. Operation and maintenance is not considered eligible. So again, if you had a debris basin and there wasn't an extreme event and you just wanted to clean that out, that's not what EWP is for. All of those eligible sites are actually determined during the DSR, so you want to make sure that you take the NRCS team out to those sites to make sure that they get covered. So project components, again, we're going to kind of hit on a few things multiple times. We want to provide protection from additional flooding and soil erosion. We want to restore hydraulic function or hydraulic capacity to the natural environment. We want to be able to pass those flows through without causing risk to life and property. Again, we want to reduce that threat. And all of these projects have to be defensively, environmentally, and economically defensively sound and technically sound. So we, again, this comes back to that 25% cost share. That's one thing, is a lot of times the sponsors don't want to pay a whole lot of money, but also we can only we can only have a project cost as much as we are going to protect. So if there's a home that's $1 million home, we can't spend $10 million to protect it. That's what that means. Next slide here. Okay, program eligibility. We already hit that one. We're going backwards. All right. So just quick policy recap. NRCS may determine that a measure is ineligible for any reason. So this generally comes back to the state conservation engineer, at least in Utah, where they determine whether or not these projects are eligible or not. NRCS will not provide funding for activities undertaken by a sponsor prior to the signing of an agreement between the NRCS and the sponsor. This is something that's very important, because a lot of times we get called out the day after the flood and they say, well, we need to clean up the roads. Are you going to pay for it? Nope, we're not. Generally speaking, those are things that the sponsor is going to be able to do on their own. And these need to be things that the sponsor can't accomplish on their own. So again, we don't want to undertake projects prior to getting approval by the NRCS, or they become ineligible. NRCS policy and standards must be met for all work undertaken. So again, we want to work with the NRCS closely. They have to be tied back to a practice code and an NRCS approved practice, which we have standards for, and so we have to meet those standards. NRCS will not reimburse the sponsor for any work that was not approved prior to construction. So a lot of times we get in the middle of a project, it's getting built, and there's a need for some additional work. So the sponsor just goes ahead and does it. If there's not prior approval, that becomes ineligible for this program. So again, we want to make sure that we're working closely with the local NRCS office to make sure that we get these projects completed and eligible and up to NRCS standards. Okay, quick break for questions.
We did have one question come in, and that was answered by Jose Rosado. Jose is a NRCS program manager for the EWP program. And so, Jose, we welcome you. And he typed in the link for the EWP manual that you spoke about a couple times. So, Jason, you know, you've been right in the middle of this work so many times. You have a couple of tips for the NRCS folks that are listening in today in particular. You know, all of a sudden an emergency happens like we're seeing in Missouri with the dam, or something goes on. What tips do you have for how to deal with that? I mean, you already have a workload, you're already working hard. Tips on EWP. What things have you learned in your experience as an NRCS employee?
Yeah, so the number one thing I learned is, again, is get familiar with that manual. At least read it one time. I think it's like 18 pages. It's really user friendly. So that when you show up on site and people ask those questions, hey, will the NRCS pay for, we have to clean this channel because it might rain again. Can I start that now? Now there is a possibility of doing an exigent project. And so you might be able to get approval to get that done faster than typical timelines. And so there are possibilities there. Also just tying back, ask yourself when you hit the ground, what life, what property am I protecting, or how am I restoring hydraulic function? To me, if you stay within those guidelines, generally your project is eligible if you can answer those questions. And then the last one is you know, quickly, once a an engineering company is selected to be able to do these contracts or do the design, you don't need to hold that information back. A lot of times just saying, you know, we only have $1 million here because that's all the property that we have to protect, saves them from doing a $10 million design, coming back and having to redo the design because they didn't know why we ended up with a DSR that only had $1 million in it. So good communication with the sponsor, you know, knowing the manual, and then just asking yourself always, hey, what life and what property am I protecting? Will keep you in a pretty good spot with these.
Have you found that there's any kind of pre-prep you can do? I mean, areas, for example, in the West that have a lot of fires, is there something that you can have ready available? You know you're going to have fire season. You're probably going to have some emergency response needs. And is there just like a file of stuff that you keep handy for you for this type of thing?
Yeah, probably the main thing is we get contacted by the sponsor and they need to know how to request assistance. And so we have a letter that's pretty general that we can send to the sponsor, and they can fill out with pretty, you know, they just change a few things. It makes it very quick to be able to request assistance from the state conservationist. And then again, you know what, having that conversation with the sponsor, hey, you guys are on the ground, you know this area, please go out and identify those sites early on. We had one where the sponsor came to us and said, okay, we know exactly where the damage is. We went and looked at it. We came up with the DSR, and once the contractor was selected, the engineering company, when they went on site, they identified 5 or 6 more sites that needed to be addressed. So, you know, just being open, having that communication, walk a little further than maybe the sponsor wants to take you, and then that file is just the request for assistance is super helpful. Sometimes just knowing like riprap sources, rock is always useful, and then cost, to be able to come up with a good cost estimate. And that's one of the things, if you're not familiar with, a lot of times, you know, local engineering companies, they'll give you their rates. They'll give you, they've done riprap projects recently, so they have a pretty good cost or grasp on rock, and they're happy to share those. Yeah. Because if you don't have that information, it becomes a problem for everybody.
So you pretty much know, as a district conservationist or a regional conservationist, you kind of know where these emergency situations could occur, whether it's fire, flood, and whatnot, and having a little something there in your file ready to go. That's great advice. Our next question had to deal with, does EWP differ from the Corps' Section 14 Emergency Embankment Protection Program? And I would understand if maybe our panelists don't know the answer to that, we may have to do a little digging. But if one of you just happens to know, and I'm kind of wondering if Jenna and all of her environmental work that she does for the organization maybe has bumped across the Corps' Section 14 Emergency Embankment Protection Program.
I've never worked with that program before, and I'm not familiar with it, so I can't answer that.
Yeah, we're gonna hold that. Anybody else on our panel? And then we may call out to Jose. He might be able to look that up, or Dan might have an answer for that. I'm going to leave it open right now, the question for anybody to answer. Just for our participants too that are on the line, where you find those answered questions is right in that Q&A area. You can type in questions. Our presenters can't type in questions, but they can type in answers. And then also the answered questions show up there in just one column over from where you have the opening. So with that, then I'm going to turn it back to Parker and the team.
Well, thank you. I'll actually take it. This is Eric with Jones in the Mill. Thank you, Jason and Jose and everyone so far being able to share. That's a lot of information. So we'll roll into some of the sponsor strategies that we've seen help make projects successful, and also how to increase our planning readiness. We'll do that with a fun little clip here. If you have your volume on your computer or phone, however you're listening to this webinar, go ahead and turn that volume up. it's a little clip here from Cars that might relate to those that have been involved in this program.
Quicker than quick, faster than fast, I am speed. Come on, Luigi. On your mark, catch us head, and go!
46 miles per hour, 63 miles out of range, out of range, out of range.
Huh. That's odd. I didn't go!
On sand, you gotta ease into your start so your tires can grab, okay?
Okay.
You do work with race cars, don't you?
Yeah, but never outside.
All right, let's go again.
Go! 54 miles per hour.
There you go!
75 miles per hour, out of range, out of range, out of range.
Sorry. Got stuck.
Go again! And go!
Sorry.
Go! Go!
The beach ate me.
All right, Cruz, pick a line on the compacted sand. You gotta have traction or you're gonna spin out. Let's do this thing. On your mark, get set to go.
122 miles per hour, 134 miles, out of range, out of range, out of range.
Now what?
I didn't want to hit a crab.
You gotta be kidding me.
What? It was cute.
All right, one last chance to try this before it gets dark. Now, you're gonna take off slow to let your tires grab.
Yes.
And pick a straight line on hard sand so you don't spin out.
Uh-huh.
And all of the crabbies have gone night-night.
Mr. McQueen.
All right, let's go again.
150 miles per hour, 175 miles per hour, 196 miles per hour.
All right, finally, you made it. Congratulations.
Hopefully you could relate to some of those puns, I guess. Oftentimes, you know, there's probably a lot of parallels we could draw, but when the clock starts on that 220 days, like Jason mentioned, it goes by really quick, and it also sometimes seems like we might be spinning our wheels or getting buried in permitting, or maybe we run into some T&E species that we didn't anticipate, or it snows really hard up here in Utah. We often have a weather delay. So we'll talk about all those things as we continue forward, but a couple of our early sponsor strategies that we feel have helped in the past as all really involve communication. And I don't think we necessarily have that word on some of these slides, but I'll mention that. Just good communication, and Jason mentioned that as well. But a thing that had been mentioned already, but involving the design consultant or an engineer early on. If a sponsor is going to need to contract a consultant, I don't think it's against the rules to do that procurement in tandem with getting the agreements in place, and so that can be done before that flag is waved and the agreement signed and that clock starts to tick. And if that's possible to have that selection happen earlier, that is great as well. And often, you know, you may not have the entire scope of work ironed out, but having a qualifications based selection is a great option there, and we feel it's the best option. So involving them early on and also helping them be a part of the process, like Jason mentioned, with cost estimates and local pricing, also helping them understand the budget and what the expectations are. And that kind of rolls into the second one, establishing the sponsor goals early on, being able to understand and also check that those goals are in alignment. For example, we have one project that the initial goal is probably to rebuild a road. And as we have been told, that's not part of the EWP program. But they also had other goals as that program and the guidelines were discussed and understood. They were able to identify some of the other important parts of this project for them, with water quality, with the watershed and the burn and the flood that had happened afterwards. So just establishing those goals together, and I would say keeping those at the forefront of everyone's mind as we move forward, even through construction. That you know, we've often had in construction meetings the goals written right up top, maybe 2 or 3 simple goals that can help remind all of us why we're here. And that often helps refocus when there may be challenges or decisions that need to be made. And then rolling into phasing of work, we'll have a few examples later on, but if there's an element of the project that might take a lot longer to get permitting or to get approvals for, maybe it's something that's large enough that requires a national level review, and there's other elements that require a state level review from the NRCS, or for example, an area that needs a stream alteration permit or an Army Corps permit, but there's other portions of the work that could be done outside of a wetland or waters of the US area. Identify those because they may be a really quick way to get something going and get some improvements on the ground while another later phase follows with the permitting and approvals coming afterwards. And that actually rolls us into the next section. We'll let Jenna talk about permitting.
Everybody's favorite part of an emergency, sitting back and getting a permit. The real key to success, I've found, is if we start thinking about this as soon as we start. You've got to know where you're going to end up. Army Corps permits don't happen immediately. They can take up to 60 days, and they've still got to have some of the cultural compliance documented. So it's really helpful if you're, again, communicating early with the project team, looking for pieces you can break off. Are there parts of the project that aren't going to require a permit? Maybe prioritize those. If you're looking at work on land that is not private, that's publicly administered, you may have to get authorization from the BLM or the Forest Service. You've got to be aware of those timelines. Fish and Wildlife Service. So there's really 3 big regulations that the program still has to comply with: Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, and the Cultural Resource Acts. So Fish and Wildlife Service has a website where you can plug in your project area and get a report right away that tells you which species you might need to consider. The sooner that you can start planning for surveys or avoidance, the better off you're going to be. And then if you know that you've got a good material source nearby, you may still need to permit that. Here in the state of Utah, it depends on how big the material is, where it's going, what it's being used for. That can all affect how you permit that. So the more information that you have early on, the more you can strategize to streamline each of those permits. So just one example, and I'm sure we'll talk about this. We had a project, an EWP project with Eric up north that we had to get multiple permits for. Army Corps, state stream alteration permit, a permit with the Forest Service. And there were enough components that we were able to split them out. We did the components that were on private property that didn't require an Army Corps permit first. And while we were working on that construction, we were able to acquire the other permits. So there are ways to approach getting your permits while still making progress.
Thank you, Jenna. So kind of rolling again in similar
So
thread.
Eric,
Yeah.
if I might
Yeah.
jump in here with a question. Jenna, this is not your first rodeo, and you gave us some great tips regarding permits. I guess in my imagination, I'm thinking, do you just put them all in the same room, take them out on a van and look at the site that you're going to be working on early on in the permitting process, or are these agencies even available for that kind of stuff? What have you found in some of the work you've done on permits?
Great question. It depends. We had a pretty large project. This was one of Eric's projects as well, up on the Strawberry River, that we knew was going to hit every resource you could imagine. We somehow got a field trip together that everyone attended. We had Fish and Wildlife Service, we had the Army Corps, we had the state, we had archaeologists, and everyone was together on site looking at the same thing and hearing the same thing. Hearing Fish and Wildlife Service say, hey, we're not concerned about this issue right here because of this. Hearing the Army Corps say, here's how we would recommend you permit it. So it was really good to have that dialogue. And then we really had investment from all the agency folks because they knew that everybody else was also engaged in trying to expedite that.
Yeah.
A lot of our projects are not that complex. It may not require that level of coordination, and it may be just pretty straightforward. We know this is the kind of permit we need to get. And it's really just site specific. But yeah, the bigger the project, the more effective getting everybody together can be.
Isn't it amazing how you can put people like that are responsible for the permitting on the land, right? Looking at the landscape together and comparing notes about what's going to be required and that sort of thing, and do that all at once rather than the shot, having to go this way or that way toward, these various other organizations. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do, 220 days, that sort of thing. But just a van ride with the right people, talking about stuff, and hopefully that can streamline some of the permitting work. Thanks, Jenna.
One thing I was going to mention as well is if you let the permitting agencies know that it is an emergency, if you get on it quick, a lot of times there's different rules because they have emergency leverage as well. It's hard if it's 2 or 3 years later and you're saying, oh, it's an emergency. That's a lot harder to use that leverage, but it is if you get on the ground quickly and effectively. A lot of times they can jump that to the front and help you get through that permitting process a lot quicker.
That's a great point. And that they could do that. They have the ability to be able to do that. Also, I think for property owners that we're about ready to talk about here in a bit, for property owners, that would have to be a bonus, right? They didn't have to talk independently and separately with all of those folks. They could talk and address their concerns right there on the spot, on the landscape, and talk a little bit about that and get some reaction back. So the relationship building is what I heard Jenna say, pretty important. And sometimes you can a lot of our questions in the registration were, how can we streamline the process? How can we get in front of it? How can we do this and that? So great tips, Jenna. Thanks so much. Back to you, Eric. Thanks.
I wanted to point out, I think the first Menti had something about, don't serve refreshments. I would highly recommend you serve refreshments in those cases. It seems to bring more people to those meetings. So that same project, I feel like we had a tradition where we had a contractor that had a really good cook, not on staff, but a family member. And we often had refreshments at our meetings, and it was a great way to just get a little sugar in the morning and be able to gather together and again move the project forward. So thank you, Ray. Talking about land rights, the couple boxes here with some different scenarios, but understanding early on what is there existing and what you may need to do the project with easements. Also understanding land ownership and what lands are public lands and what private property owners are involved. I'll come back to that, but also, understanding what other things might be underground. Maybe there's things that are underground that are exposed or destroyed. What other utilities or other elements are part of the larger project, and maybe future projects have to come back after the EWP work is done. Doing things like bridges, for example, the counties often want to get a bridge replaced. Again, that's not something that can be done through EWP funds, but we've been able to find ways to have the county time that such that they hire a contractor, and when the channel's prepped and the cleaning's done, the county's separate contract comes and takes care of installing a bridge, and then the EWP is able to armor the bridge and work together, staying within the lines and staying in their lanes in terms of the funding. And then also understanding what right-of-ways may be available. That also can sometimes allow work to be done sooner because you don't have to have a new easement. Ray had brought up something in our practice session that I feel like was a really good point. With the private property owners, often they are the ones that just experience this disaster, and remembering that and understanding, putting yourself in their shoes and being empathetic to their, often in the couple that I've worked on, they've been burned out, their cabins have been burned out, destroyed, and then they got flooded out because of the terrain, and the burn scar just seems to attract those big monsoon rainstorms that cause all this damage. And so just being sensitive and allowing them to be heard, listening more than we speak sometimes, and then also helping them understand the program. You don't have to read them the manual. You could refer them to the manual if they need to read, but helping them understand the expectations and the timeline. We had one property owner that was really frustrated with why the county and the NRCS was not just going to work immediately. Not really understanding or caring about any sort of permitting. He wanted to get a dozer in the river and push the road back in and get back to his cabin and his property. But I think through the process, we were able to help him understand the steps that were going to be necessary, and help him understand the timeline, and again, just make them part of the equation and understand their needs early on. I think it kind of rolls into something that we've been touching on in several different ways so far, but just having early involvement with all the agencies that are stakeholders in the project. Like Jenna mentioned, we did have a really good field trip early on one of our projects that eliminated a lot of permitting needs, because Fish and Wildlife was able to see the conditions. And then ironically, the kind of the sister project to that project was further upstream and was not accessible. And after it sat for a year or two, there was quite a few more wetlands and more habitat that required more permitting. So again, in that case, we were able to keep the state Division of Wildlife Resources as part of our team. They would come to the meetings, they would provide feedback during the design, and made a successful project. But just understanding everyone's needs and their desires, and then aligning the project team and aligning the expectations to the program is critical. I think we've talked a little bit about the value of match, but that's definitely one of our things that's been a great success, is understanding what's available. Maybe a county has cash and they're fine to bring that 25% in cash, but I doubt there's very many of those across the nation right now. Being able to find material, and even material on site, like in this picture, we had riprap on site that Mother Nature had mined for us in many cases, and it met the hardness specifications of the project, and if it hadn't quite, we could have worked with NRCS to find a solution to maybe oversize the riprap, for example. But having some of that material that we were already going to be cleaning out and handling, the timbers were all trees that had been washed down with the flood. We were able to select the bigger timbers to make a post-assisted log structure in this channel. The Division of Wildlife was excited for it because it could create more wetlands and habitat. The county was excited for it because it was catching the big trees that would normally plug up the bridges downstream. And so being able to understand the value of these materials and the match that they could provide allowed us to tailor our designs to utilize that material and provide a win-win, to be able to really save money and extend the dollars. Like on this project, this section of the project, we were able to go quite a bit further with the dollar that we were given, the 75 cents that came from the NRCS with the materials we were able to use for match. So also don't forget the partnering agencies. Another example on this one again was the DWR had water rights in this river channel, and we needed water for construction, for dust control, because it was very dusty, and compaction and some embankments and other things. So they were able to do a change application and use those water rights for the project, which saved a lot of money. The alternative would have been having to deliver truck water in, water trucks in from a source that was, 15 to 20 miles away and on a really bumpy dirt road. So just keep all your eyes and ears open in that case. So any questions, I guess, turn back to you, Ray.
So it's a good time to just say, if you've got a question for our presenters, please type it in the Q&A area in your Zoom dashboard. That would be good. One interesting question, Eric, that came in during the registration process. It gets back to land rights and some of the, if can a sponsor sell land once they've placed a restriction on the deed? So if there is a restriction on the deed that comes from the EWP work and whatnot, have you had any, let me ask the question a different way. Have you had any experience with that? Maybe that's something you haven't experienced. Any restrictions on the land as a result of working EWP projects?
I personally haven't had any experience on that. I know one of our projects, it was a consideration because of the extent of the work that would have to happen to go to the properties. There was an alternative of buying the properties. Jason, I don't know if you've had a situation in that, or Darren or Parker, but I personally haven't yet.
Yeah, and that was one of the questions. I guess I kind of took it two ways. Could a sponsor or could let's say an individual. So an individual had some work done on their property through the sponsor and the EWP program. Could they sell their property later? The answer would be yes. The operation and maintenance would go with that. So we always look back to the operation and maintenance to the sponsor, but a lot of times they enter into an MOU with a irrigation company or a landowner, and they'll be able to pass that operation and maintenance off to the landowners. So operation and maintenance must be done, for the life of the practice, and the life of the practice comes from, what we're installing. There's NRCS lifespan. So there's some things there. The other one is, there are possibilities of doing flood easements, buyout type things with EWP funds. If that's the case, could they sell it and come back and construct later? The answer would be no. Generally, it's a lifespan. There's a reason we went into that, and generally it's because there's no other option.
Easements would follow the rules of the land regarding sales too, I suppose. The easement would follow the title, things like. Okay, great. All right, let's move on then.
Great. Now we're going to visit a little bit more about some common challenges, and these may be perhaps a little more common to our neck of the woods and working in the mountain region here in the West. But we do have this great picture of Eric on his horse. He'd mentioned earlier that there was a project site in an EWP project that was not accessible. But Eric, we've got some other pictures later on too that'll help paint the picture, but leave it to Eric to find a solution. He got his trusty horse up there and was able to go do a plan review. So, just be aware of your surroundings and your situations. A lot of our EWP projects that we work on too, there's a fire that happens first, and then there's flooding that happens afterwards. And sometimes it's immediately after the fire, and sometimes it's a year or two later or months after. So just be aware of that. Be aware of changing conditions, worsening conditions, things of that nature, and especially just the hydrology that can change. One of the first things we often do is we'll look at like a stream stats hydrology report, just to understand the magnitude of the hydrology for an area. But again, if there's a fire or severe flooding, sometimes that's not even going to get you in the ballpark. So just be aware of that. And again, here's some limited site access issues that Eric experienced in northern Utah. But as you plan around that, work around that, make sure, and Jason had hit on this, but make sure you look at the entire scope of the project. both from a sponsor standpoint and the NRCS standpoint. And then also once you bring on technical assistance and have engineering involved, so that all parties understand the scope of the work and the need. And then the other critical part that's depicted here in these pictures is it wasn't only limited site access for the sponsor and the NRCS and the engineer, but it's also the property owners. So sometimes it's really hard to explain to property owners that we're working through the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, and it's going to take a year or in some cases longer, by the time you get extensions and weather delays. So as you have those discussions and public involvement and help set that stage, I think the key there is just helping people understand that we're doing all we can, and then not only that we convey that message through our words, but also through our actions. Sometimes this can create DSR discrepancies, the changing landscape. We've had several projects where the DSR has been done immediately after a fire, and the improvements make sense for the way the landscape sits at that time. But by the time the funds get obligated, which sometimes takes several months, we've had a monsoon come through, and that's caused extreme flooding and incisement of channels and debris and all kinds of other issues. And then that creates a DSR discrepancy. The sooner that those can be identified and mitigated, the better for everybody. So both from a technical standpoint and the sponsor, to identify those and communicate them with the NRCS, but also to involve the agencies that may or may not be involved as well. So be aware of that. And really, I think the big, if you take one thing away from this whole presentation, the way we like to approach the EWP program is just one giant team effort. It's the engineer and the sponsor and the NRCS and the Forest Service and BLM and everybody else that's involved, just one big team with one common goal, working together. And then the other thing too that's helpful, we've had opportunities from time to time where events have happened, fires have happened, and the sponsors reached out to us immediately for discussion and thoughts, and then that's allowed us to visit or either visit directly with the NRCS or provide technical input back to the sponsor, which they've been able to convey back to the NRCS. And again, that kind of just helps set the stage from the beginning, helps us all align our goals and eliminate or reduce the chance for some of those DSR discrepancies down the road.
And just to add to that, Parker, for the NRCS folks that are on the call, anticipate that there will be some changes after the day that shortly after the event, and that there's going to be channel incisement, there's going to be large debris flows, things like that. So I know it's hard to anticipate some of that, but it's good to factor that in as you're writing a DSR and acknowledge that there's going to be, it usually gets a little worse before it gets better. And anticipate some of that, and where possible, get some other insights. Sometimes this has happened before, maybe 50 years ago or whatever, or 20 years ago, and other insights as to how to anticipate what else could happen, and try as best you can to, at the very least, to include some contingency within the DSR, both in terms of some cases cost, and in some cases the footprint of where the work needs to occur. Try to consider upstream, downstream, beyond what you see the first day.
So while you're on a roll there about the ability to adjust costs after DSR is complete, you might cover that if you want to, as one of our registration questions. Is there an ability to adjust the cost after the DSR is complete?
Yeah, so I was just gonna chime in on that as well. Generally, a good rule of thumb is take what you expect this project to cost and double it.
Oh.
And that sounds know,
Yeah.
extreme, but the reality is, like Darren said, I mean, we had one, it went through, we thought it was $200,000, $250,000 would knock it out of the park. And, by the time we were done, it was, we had monsoon after monsoon after monsoon hit. It was a fire. We went out, like Darren was saying, not much there. We thought, well, we can go in and do some preventative stuff. By the time we finished that DSR, we were up over $1 million. So, you know, we can always turn money back, and that's a great thing. But you know, a 10% contingency is generally not very good. You're in an emergency, so there's a lot of things going on. The sponsor a lot of times doesn't see the entire site, and then the cost. You're in an emergency, so you're trying to hurry things up, and then again, if it comes in below budget, that's wonderful. But a good way to explain it is, you know, if we're at a 220-day deadline and we're trying to push, and we have a storm, and now we need another $100,000. Well, the NRCS, what we have to do is go and request more funding. We have to have a request from the sponsor. Generally, it's a 60-day process. They're already on site. They're trying to get things done. So do you stop construction for 60 days? Just think of how that would operate. So having enough money is kind of critical to keep these moving forward. And then being flexible, like you said, not just the cost, but also the area is going to be impacted, especially on fire type stuff, because what you're seeing initially is nothing compared to what's going to come.
So you're much better off putting that in the initial DSR, the cost double the cost, and there will be need for adjustments, but the adjustments after the DSR is done, not so handy, pretty hard to do.
Yeah, it just extends the project significantly, and then, you know, it feels like you're always chasing that extension or that cost. That it just,
yeah, go in high, come in under budget, on time.
Yeah, I mean, that's some
yeah.
people might not like me saying that, but honestly, and then, you know, the contractors, I mean, know that you got to trust them, right? They're gonna, and you know, the economically viable. It's not like they can come in and triple the cost of rock. We can check price of rock. We're going to make sure, you know, it has to be economically defensible. And so that's one of the things I review when we get the bids is, yeah, are we reasonable or are we not reasonable? And so it's not just going to jump the cost of the project for no reason, I guess is the point.
Thanks, guys.
We found very competitive bids from contractors from that range all the way for the same project, all the way to those contractors that are just kind of fishing for an emergency project. And if you communicate well, I feel like most EWP projects come in very competitively bid. The other thing I want to bring up just real quick is sometimes we've had FEMA involved in projects, and they get involved in costing, and their approach to standard equipment rates and standard cost of things has not been, at least in our area, has not met the current market. So beware of that. If FEMA's involved and they're helping to cost certain things, if it's a EWP related thing, just make sure you get another opinion from the construction side of things.
Yeah, don't be shy on the estimates. I'm hearing over and over again as a theme. And one of the theme that was noticed was that the program actually is NRCS wants to protect the property, not replace property. So I know we got more program here, but kind of keep that in mind. Maybe we'll come back to that question a little bit later. So back to our panelists, please. Thanks for that interruption.
Yeah, no, great information and great thoughts on the DSR. Excuse me. Really, the DSR is the foundation that sets the tone for the rest of the project. And there's there's nothing more frustrating or harder than coming in as a consultant after the DSR is done and the 220-day clock's already started, and then we've wasted another month trying to get trying to get the engineer on board. We've had projects where we've come in where there's less than 150 days left of the original 220. So that starting line readiness is important and critical. And all of that factors in, you know, having a DSR that's accurate, having the available funds to protect the infrastructure that is important to the sponsor. Other things that can impact starting line readiness is we've had some EWPs where the county's been the main sponsor, and then there was 6 other municipalities that were co-sponsors. The total EWP project was about $18 million. And we had to juggle between 2 engineering consulting firms and 7 co-sponsors and co-sponsors, and then $18 million worth of projects. And that was quite challenging, but given the size and the scale of that project, I feel like it went pretty well because the sponsor was ready to go when the clock started ticking. And that was one of the important things there was just having all of our ducks in a row before the agreement was signed and the money was there. We've hit on this a little bit, but again, this can be a major positive in a project, and it can also be a major issue and concern. Is just, you know, if you have multiple agencies, be aware with early of what who might be involved and what they may require, and then coordinate with them early and often. You know, the T&E, Jenna spoke to all this earlier, but again, this if you deal with it early and upfront, it can be one of the great successes of your project. And if you're maybe a little bit behind the ball or miss a critical agency, it can delay plan reviews, it can delay permitting, it can delay construction, all of which can add to, you know, the need to get an extension and potentially needing the extension and not being granted one because we've missed something. So that communication early and often is absolutely critical. The property owners, we've talked about this a little bit too, but again, from a challenges standpoint, we've had projects where the private property owners involved have been numerous, more so than you'd want to just go knock on doors and visit one-on-one. So occasionally it makes sense to do public scoping meetings where we can discuss the project purpose and need and outline the program and the timeline and expectations, you know, and just add that opportunity for affected property owners to, 1, voice their concerns and questions, and then 2, also help set and temper their expectations. You know, sometimes we're operating within existing easements, which we would already have the right to be there, but it's still common courtesy to explain what we need to do and why. Many of the projects we do, we're getting new easements or you know, negotiating terms with property owners to reestablish ditches or canals that used to be there, that used to handle flood water that have been abandoned and no longer there. So you know, that's important. And then, you know, like Eric had mentioned earlier and Ray had mentioned in our practice session, just keep in mind that this is a post-disaster program. So, you know, people have lost property, they've lost, in some cases, everything that they own. So just be sensitive to that and help them, you know, in this time of need and understand what the program can do. And in some cases, you know, they may need to reach out for help elsewhere to get what they need.
One other piece there, with dealing with property owners, in our experience, identifying the key people on the sponsor side who have relationships with property owners, who have their known, and coordinating with them, giving them the information, backing them up, backing the sponsor people up in coordinating property owners tends to work best. So engage your sponsoring agencies and the right people from those agencies to help deliver some of these messages seems to work best.
And I think we've mentioned this before, and just to reiterate, so land rights is a sponsor responsibility, so that's not paid for through EWP. So again, just be aware of that upfront as a sponsor, and NRCS folks, please feel free to remind sponsors that upfront as well. We've had some projects where for some reason that came as a surprise to the sponsor later in the project than it should have, but yeah, just be aware of that. Jason, anything to add?
No, like Parker said, having those, sometimes a scoping meeting to pull in a lot of people is a great way to get people on board. I've rarely had somebody leave those and not be on board with what we're trying to do.
And again, sometimes availability of materials can be a challenge. We've had projects that have been out in the desert, in the sandstone, where the rock's not hard enough and doesn't meet the NRCS standards. So just knowing your surroundings and what's available can be a great help. And Eric mentioned this as well. You know, many of our projects are near good rock sources, or you know, waters there, and can be used for match and timber. And as you approach the DSR, you know, early in the process, both from a technical standpoint and then from the NRCS and the sponsor standpoint, just looking for opportunities there to design around your available resources can save the whole project money. It can save money in freighting in material that you know you may have to import from a large distance, or you know, you may be able to identify the opportunity to use more timber and maybe some soft bank armor options rather than hard armor. So again, if you just look at your opportunities and the challenges that may arise, and if you see them as opportunities early in the project, you can design around them and use them to your advantage. And with that, Ray, we'll take a break for questions.
Sounds great. Let's take on the first one. It kind of deals with the what you were just talking about. Are the sponsor acquired land rights creditable to the 25% cost share? Any one of our panelists want to answer that one?
They are not.
Okay. They're not. Okay.
Nope.
Appreciate that.
Land rights are on the sponsor.
All right. Would you say that most of the time the 220 days is extended in your experience in working with the EWP project?
So this is something that Utah NRCS is actually trying to push pretty hard to deal with, is the 220 days. What we really want to see, so the answer to that would be yeah, probably a lot of them get extended. There's things that are in our control and there's things that aren't. So you have to ask your question, why is this getting extended? And you know, Parker and I had one the other day. I mean, it's been a year ago or something. We got on it and we were on track for the 220 days. We had to do some modifications to the design that extended us, and we got it done. But we were in construction, we were doing the work, we had our permitting, everything in place when we filed for that extension. And that really helps. So I guess one of the questions one of the things I would say to ask yourself, if you think it's going to take 3 years to get done, it probably doesn't fit the EWP program. You might want to look into PL 566 or some other programs that the NRCS has to offer. If you feel like you can get it done this year, then it probably does fit. So again, an emergency program, we know the large scale of the projects. If you have a giant fire and like you say, there's a lot of different entities that are going to be looking at this, that's going to be extended probably. But to me, you know, every time we go to try to do an extension, we have a discussion. Why are we extending this? Is it because we're not doing our job? Is it because the contractor's not doing their job? Is it because the permitting's not happening? And again, there's things that are out of our hands and there's things that are well within our control. And so you just need to make sure you're dealing with those things that are within your control to try and have them done in that 220 days.
So let's talk that 220 days just a little bit further. This question came in during the initial meetings. Is it important for NRCS and the local sponsor to overshare their internal processes on tasks, such as obtaining the current survey data for design and procurement, for permitting and consultation deliverables, to truly understand if the project can be constructed in the 220 days with required environmental compliance for federal and state regulations? So the question deals with, is it better to, overshare? And I'm going to add probably terminology here, manage expectations, especially during those initial meetings when emotions are running high, people are anxious and energized to do something, etc., as we've talked about before. But managing expectations about some time it's going to take to get these things done, environmental permits, all that. Any one of our panelists want to tackle that one, please, on live?
Yeah, managing expectations is a huge portion of the NRCS is my job. The consultants generally do a very good job of that as well. I think it's important to note, again, at those public meetings, just to show what has to happen. Permits have to be in place. We have to do environmental clearances. There's a lot of work that has to be crunched into that 220 days. And then I think, explaining, they hear 220 days and they think, okay, 220 days from the disaster, and understanding that a lot of times there's no funding available. We have to chase that funding. And so, that 220 days could be a year, could be a year and a half. And then, obviously, like you said, there's weather and other things that come into play. So managing expectations is a giant part of this process for sure.
Well, obviously, as we're talking about those initial meetings, it's probably good to have a good facilitator that you've got on your speed dial. If something like this were to happen and you did need the EWP program, having that good facilitator to be able to help work with the sponsors on a session design, letting the publics know what the expectations are and how this all works and the different coordinations that go on. Just putting a plug in for a good facilitation. Anybody want to handle that one?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. A lot of times if you go into these meetings and people are frustrated because not a lot's happening, it can become just a session of complaining. And so a lot of times just reminding people, look, we're here to find solutions. We need to identify the problems. And once we identify the problems, we can come up with solutions and a timeline. That really helps, change that mindset so that people are trying to be proactive and help out with the project. Again, explaining that if we don't have land access fairly quick, it's going to delay the project. If you delay the project here, it delays. It's a slinky effect is the way I call it. We get year delay. Well, we lose priority from the contractor or the sponsor or the whatever. And so it delays many other things on down the road. So.
And just to add to that agency oversharing or managing expectations, there's typically opportunity to identify parallel or things that can happen in concert. And that's super important. And for agencies to sometimes acknowledge other agencies' work and accept their work, or I guess get multiple agencies on board with the meeting all of their expectations with one process, oftentimes parallel things happening at the same time. That makes sense.
Very good.
Jen is really good at that, helping us identify some of those parallel tracks, working with us as like design team and project managers to figure out how to save days.
So one thing I'll note is every EWP project that happens in Utah has at least a once a month meeting, and generally it's every 2 weeks. And depending on what's happening, sometimes it can be as much as a week to make sure that the project's moving forward, that we're meeting our deadlines, that sometimes what'll happen is, you'll have somebody think they're waiting on another person, and reality is that email came and they missed it, or whatever it is. Or we need a contract, we need to reach out to the Army Corps because we're not getting our permitting fast enough. And generally, just having those touch base, sometimes it's even 10 minutes. Hey, yeah, we're working on it. The designs, we're just working on the design. The permitting's in, that just keeps it at the forefront of everyone's mind. And that's probably been one of the most helpful things to meet these timelines.
Okay, the folks are lighting up our questions dashboard here, so going to ask for a few things here. Let me take two fairly short ones, and then we're going to move right on. Have you ever requested the 100% cost share due to sponsor not having funds, or is the sponsor responsible, or in this case, up the creek? Have you ever requested 100% cost share due to sponsor not having funds? Some extraordinary situations that may happen. Any experience with that?
I have not. Generally, again, we can find a rock source that the county or the city has or something so that we can come up with a 25%. We really try to utilize that. I've never run into that situation personally.
Okay. Let me ask another question. Is the level of environmental compliance different? And we may leave that one up for our NRCS policy folks to answer, that one regarding can you request over. And then is there a difference between the EWP and a PL 566 project for environmental compliance? Let's tackle that one.
Go ahead.
Yes. Totally different programs, totally different approach. And we are going to talk a little bit about NEPA in this presentation that might help tease out some of the differences between those two programs on the environmental side.
Sounds good, Jenna. All right, let's move on, and let me invite our presenters to go ahead. You've got some open questions there. There's some excellent ones. Some but probably could be answered by some of our NRCS folks there, and we'd be happy if you would just go ahead and pop in there and answer some of those questions that came up. Excellent. Very good. Let's move on, please, to our panelists.
Well, it's been a heavy discussion. We need another little quick film, so we'll watch another one, kind of the other way around from the first one.
Come on, guys, we gotta get her out there. Let's go.
Tires, check.
Fuel, check. Ramon.
Best I could do in the time frame, boss.
Yeah, that'll work.
Why are you doing this? You said it yourself. This might be your last chance.
Which makes it my last chance to give you your first chance, Cruz. And this time I want you to take it. She's got to beat that pace car out.
No, you can't do that.
Now or never. What do you say? Whoa, hey, 35-mile-per-hour pit speed.
I knew that.
Lightning McQueen's team has entered a different car sporting the 95.
I don't believe what I'm seeing.
You're watching this, right?
What, the girl in the costume? You're kidding me. He put her in the race? And how far back is she now?
Look behind you.
What?
Good evening, Storm.
Wait, how did you...
Just back here drafting on your butt. Nothing to be concerned about.
Like 2 June bugs on a summer night.
Hey, Hamilton.
Hamilton here.
Call out our speed.
208 miles per hour. 207 miles per hour.
Stop that! You're taking me off my line!
Last lap. Come on, Cruz.
Uh-oh. My GPS is saying I have slow traffic in my way.
No. You are not winning this.
Ah, you're angry.
I am not angry.
You know, you can use that anger to push through.
I said I'm not angry. Well, I don't think so.
I have to go watch the show to see the ending, I guess, but I think just some of the principles there that we talked about, partnering. I like the part in the the pit crews just there. Everyone has a part in this process and in the projects, and just having that attitude of partnering, like we've talked several times, with contractors, professional staff, consultants, and the sponsor and the NRCS, that really makes a big difference. And I think we've shared a lot of examples at this point, but Jason, would you add anything in the NRCS's perspective of partnering?
No, I think you guys covered it pretty well.
And I think the only thing I would add is, if you feel like from your seat on the bus that communication isn't happening, feel free to be the person that reaches out and ask the question. You know, usually the NRCS is in the driver's seat from at the beginning, and then the sponsor kind of takes over, and then once they hire an engineer, then generally the professional staff from the engineering firm takes over. But again, you know, regardless of where your seat is on the bus, you know, if you feel like we need to communicate more, be that person that reaches out and asks the right question to the right person. And we can all sometimes use a gentle reminder that we're not communicating enough from our perspective, and that's all helpful. So we talked a little bit about quick response, but again, this was a project we did in northern Utah where there was a fire, and we were actually invited by the city that the fire occurred just above them. It was in their municipal boundary, but we were invited by them to actually tour the site while the fire was still burning. There were still hot spots. The site was still controlled by the firefighting crews, and we had to be escorted through. But that's a perfect example of being there as the disaster's happening and shortly thereafter. We've also had similar experiences during flood events and after flood events. There's mountains of information that can be had to sit there and watch an event happen and unfold and start thinking about it in real time. And not only that, but all of that happens before the 220 days starts. So it can start the creative juices flowing. It can get ideas out there, establish the goals of the sponsor. In many cases, it helps us identify that there's other sponsors that need to be involved. A lot of times the city will identify issues and concerns on their side, and then sometimes there's damage further up the watershed that extends beyond their political boundary, and then you need to involve county and Forest Service and other agencies like that. So yeah, just make that a priority, both from an NRCS perspective, if you're able, if you're the one writing the DSR, you know, try to be involved early, and then as sponsors, you know, be involved early and involve technical assistance, technical help when you can.
I think this slide kind of talks about how we can find the lost days, you know, trying to get started earlier and capture some of those moments when maybe there could be something being done. And we talked about project phasing, and here's a couple examples of that. We had a project, and there's a slide that has a photo of it later, that we were able to identify a couple opportunities to phase early on. I think Jenna mentioned this, but we were able to do some channel cleaning on a canal that had been getting all of the runoff water just directly dumping into the canal and filling it full of sediment and then washing out and overtopping, and also filling quite a few farms downstream with their settling ponds. Did their job, but it was a one-time thing, and they were stuck digging out ash and sand. And that happened multiple times. But once the agreement was in place and there was a need to clean it again, we were able to break that part off as a first phase and get the approvals where it didn't need permitting, and there was a maintenance and a right of way already in place to do that work. They were able to start immediately. While we worked on phase 2, which was other areas that didn't require an Army Corps permit. Phase 3 became some of the improvements that did lie within waters of the U.S. and needed the Army Corps and stream alteration permits. That's kind of rolling into the other middle bullet point there of avoiding excessive permitting. Like understand what permitting would be required for the solutions. Oftentimes there could be a dam safety element with the state, Army Corps like we talked about, and getting the materials and the access routes and construction access roadways. Those things are all part of the footprint and part of the equation. Finding ways to identify that and being creative. I think that was another point of that video. Lightning McQueen was creative and helping his team win the race by picking another solution that no one else had really thought about. That's one of the questions I think was asking about permitting challenges and when the permitting agency doesn't concur with the fact that it's an emergency. That's one of these, one way to approach that is slicing off that part of the project and letting it, working on things that you can work on and pushing them forward while maybe another parallel effort is happening that's not as quick. And that's where it could roll into possibly an extension. And again, just communicating that with NRCS and the agencies is important.
Yeah, another way we find lost days in the project. We found early on in projects that we got killed by waiting the entire procurement process. Most of the time that takes 2 or 3 weeks minimum to advertise it and do the site visits and open bids. And then you're usually another week or two to make an award by the time you get to a council or a commission meeting. And then sometimes you're another 2 to 3 weeks before you get bonds in place. So we were finding, that we could easily eat 60 days just getting a contractor on board. So in projects where it makes sense, we've actually implemented a contractor design assist, or at least a pre-qualifications pool, where we can solicit qualified contractors during the design, bring them on board, and then as we get the final design approval from the NRCS, where we can typically turn that around in a much shorter timeline because the contractors are already familiar with the project and what we're trying to do. So again, thinking outside the box, being creative, both with getting engineering firms on board up front, but then also when you go to select a contractor, that can save quite a bit of time. And it's not on this slide, but I'll just toss out here and reiterate the design practice standards that we tie all the engineering back to. Having those conversations early and often with the NRCS staff is helpful. Like Eric had mentioned, we can split off stuff that needs a national review and put that on a separate track and move other project elements forward. In some cases, we can change the type of protection that was originally called out in a DSR and maybe find something that fits more appropriately, that sometimes can fall into a different practice standard or practice class as well, and change the review process there. So anything you can do on that end up front is helpful. And the other thing too is, and we haven't really talked about any of this yet, but as you're doing design reports and QA, QC plans, and the O&M manual that goes with the project, again, as you just follow all the design practice standards and identify all those elements and address the information that's required there, it just makes your reviews so much quicker and faster on the back end. So again, on the schedule, you've got the baseline of 220. Many projects do require extensions, but the more work you can get done in that first 220 just makes it that much easier to justify an extension. And generally, weather and sometimes permitting of federal agencies can be outside factors, but there's a lot of internal factors as well. So be aware of those. Make sure that the project manager is on top of those things and planning for them up front. We're blessed and fortunate to have Jenna, so she really quarterbacks all of the permitting stuff and kind of takes that out of our, takes that off like Eric and I's plate where we don't have to worry about it, and that's super helpful. And then again, the plan reviews, just being aware of those and providing the information that's needed upfront and coordinating that early. And then, well, I don't know if this is the same everywhere, but I know here in Utah, we're asked to start planning 60+ days before your contract expiration, and then submitting the extension request letter 60 days before the expiration of the contract, so that the state has plenty of time to process that and issue either a state extension or a national extension, whatever the case may be there.
Okay, now this is where I hope we actually get some answers to how do you expedite the permitting process? So we're gonna take a step back. NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. It's a federal regulation that is required anytime you have a federal nexus. So if you have federal lands, federal permits, or federal funding. The NRCS has a programmatic EIS, or Environmental Impact Statement, for the EWP program. But basically, if you follow what's in the manual, it's gonna meet that NEPA. And the process that goes with that is the DSR, and then checking the boxes for the environmental compliance items like Cultural and Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act. So in contrast, the PL 566 program does not have a programmatic EIS. You have to start with the NEPA on that program with that process. So that's how they're different right from the beginning. EWP has the NEPA done. Where we run into the challenges is if there are other federal agencies, they also have to comply with NEPA, and they may not have the same definition of emergency that the NRCS does. So even though we say, hey, it's obviously an emergency project, it's EWP, a water permitting agency may say, well, that's not our definition, and we're still going to take our full review period. So once I identify all of the different permitting components, I know I'm going to have to permit with the Army Corps and with the State Division of Water Rights. I know that we're going to have listed species. We know that we're going to have to comply with cultural resources. We will get an archaeologist on board just as quick as we can. The engineers will draw a little bit of a buffer around the areas where we expect to work, and we get them out right away. Because there's a process that takes time with that resource. That report may also be required by the Army Corps of Engineers before they will submit a permit. So if you're taking a step back and just seeing all of the agencies that are going to need this piece, it can help you be more efficient in approaching that. So to illustrate, I have a few examples. We had some flooding in Moab, famous Moab, Utah. We didn't have any public lands to worry about, but we were on a channel, so we knew that we were going to get an Army Corps permit and that the state also had jurisdiction. We were able to get a local archaeologist out there right away, so we knew what we were dealing with. We got the surveys done, and the NRCS was able to start the consultation process. We coordinated with the state and the Army Corps to figure out the most streamlined way to permit this, and the engineers helped make sure that we stayed within the limits for that easiest permit, and we were able to get that done. We've talked about, this was the East Fort fire with Eric, where part of the project was on National Forest. They had to do NEPA, they had to do a categorical exclusion to authorize the project. So while they were doing the NEPA, we split off the parts of the project that were on private. That gave us some justification when we requested the extension and showed that we were moving forward. But it also gave us a clear expectation about what was needed in the future. We've talked about having the on-site visit with all of the agencies. That was really effective for that really big project that had every issue, but that's not always necessary. We did have another project down in southern Utah on Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. There's some restrictions when you're working on a national monument, but we were able to go out on site with the BLM. We moved one of our staging areas so that we wouldn't affect greater sage grouse habitat. And then they were able to do a categorical exclusion to get us rolling on that portion while we were working on private property. So being able to take a step back and look at the big NEPA picture and see who needs what can help us strategize long-term and know why we're gonna need the extensions and how it all fits.
Thanks, Jenna. Yeah, so this just leads us back to that project phasing discussion. I think that's really been one of the biggest keys to success on EWPs that we've worked on, is just being able to have that overall project vision. Sometimes, you know, as a sponsor or even as the engineer, sometimes we're just too close to the project and we know what the overall goal is and the end goal. But sometimes we're just so close we can't step back and see that there's a more efficient route to get there. You know, project phasing is one of those critical ones, and involving contractors early and you know, sharing knowledge and site visits. It's way more effective to do one big site visit and sometimes having to wait a week or two to get everybody there than it is to do 4 or 5 different site visits and then still not having all the information with the correct agency folks. Contractor procurement and construction milestones. We've already talked a little bit about using alternate methods of contractor procurement. So, you know, design assist is helpful on complex, challenging projects, but sometimes just an RFQ and bringing on qualified contractors towards the end of design is sufficient. The other thing we've done too is helped contractors understand site access and construction, you know, ability to construct certain sites based off of weather. And again, here in Utah, we have snow in the mountains, and many of these EWP projects aren't constructible from November till April, and sometimes later. And sometimes there's monsoon season that contractors are trying to work around. And a lot of times these projects interface with irrigation companies who have to deliver water, and so just helping set that stage through your bidding process and establishing construction milestones and phases can really help contractors understand what's most important and be part of the team as well.
I think we've talked about just being efficient and with this emergency schedule and just again the frequent communication during implementation of the project. We've definitely seen the value in having those meetings and being able to have all the stakeholders that are invited to come and see progress and also, you know, acknowledge that many of you are very busy and often can't break out and go to a construction site. So we try really hard to distribute, you know, photos, progress updates, and I also know that landowners, especially in these areas that are hard to access because of the disaster, they really appreciate pictures and updates as the progress happens during construction.
One of the most important things to remember in EWP is don't forget the reclamation after the project's complete. In many of our projects, this is just reseeding, and most of the time it's just broadcast seeding over large areas. But we did have a project that involved, I believe, is over 1 square mile of reseeding over hilly area that, you know, we wouldn't be able to traditionally broadcast seed. And through some communication with an agency, a state agency that wasn't involved directly in the project, but they saw value in contracting directly with us to broadcast seed with their helicopter this area for us. And so anyways, yeah, again, just think outside the box and look for opportunities to partner. And in some cases, even with agencies that aren't involved directly, they can still have resources available to help reclaim and do other mitigation efforts as part of the project. And that ended up saving us a considerable amount of money for the project, and it ended up grassing in really nice the next year with a good seed mix for the area, and it just really helped beautify the area after that fire. So with that, that wraps up the slides, and Ray will toss it back for questions.
Thanks so much. And Darren, I believe you would like to go ahead and respond to this question. What is your experience with permitting challenges when the permitting agencies don't concur with the fact that the emergency funds don't equate to an emergency timeline for obtaining permits?
I feel like we've had a great discussion about that, and just finding ways to phase to bring some of those other agencies along to perhaps accept another agency's work. Jenna, I feel like talked about that. Anything to add on?
Sometimes that's the reality, and just knowing that that's going to be the situation going into it can help you be proactive in communicating on extension requests or letting the sponsor know what's going on. Just avoiding the surprise.
I would make one more comment is, your sponsors actually have a lot of power here, a city or a county commissioner or somebody. If you set up a meeting with, and we've always had great luck, if we want to set up a meeting with the Army Corps or the state permitting agencies, they've been happy to meet with us. But it's nice to have the people being affected on the phone, and they can help relay that information as well.
Yeah, a couple different methodologies. You mentioned phone, these Zoom meetings and team meetings or whatever, or as Jenna mentioned earlier, getting the folks out on the field, real boots on the ground to examine what's going on and talk about the permitting needs and whatnot, and the work that would be done. I'm reminded that there's always a good formula: relationships before issues and tasks. The opportunity to build relationships before you actually get into issues and tasks. And EWP just strikes me as one of those programs where if you can build relationships locally, right, with the agencies that you may be dealing with, and if this is ongoing, right, fire, flood, that sort of thing, and you're in one of those areas that has that, the opportunity to build those relationships before you have to dive into the actual activities of planning an EWP and that sort of thing and working in EWP. All right, here's another question for you, panelists. Any suggestions for addressing sponsor capacity needs when the emergency strikes? Similar question with respect to sourcing match funds. So some of the experiences you had with gathering the monies, right? We talked about the estimates and things like that, but gathering the monies, the resources, the people, that sort of thing. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I'll dive in real quick. So one of the things that comes to mind on the sponsor capacity, just be realistic as a sponsor. Do you have time from the very beginning to push this through, to be involved? And many of the sponsors we work with directly, they just don't. They're already understaffed as it is, and they're dealing with other aspects of the disaster and the impairment that fall outside of the EWP. But the ones that have been the most successful are the sponsors that have reached out for technical assistance early. Some of that they have to front the cost for, right? If it happens before the agreement and whatnot. And sometimes there's other expertise and knowledge that can be brought on and can help stretch the capacity of the sponsor. And then on the match side, I think each project's unique and different, and just understanding your resources and what's available. One thing I do on every project is I'll take, as soon as I get a hold of the DSR, I'll start mapping out, what kind of materials we're going to need, and start having those conversations with the sponsor of, is there a already permitted rock pit that's publicly available? Because that's free rock for a public entity that can count as match dollars. And if the answer is no, then the next question is, do we need to permit one? And is there one to permit? And then Eric talked about using trees and reusing dirt that we dredge out of the channels and being able to build berms and floodplain diversions, if you will. So if you can build those tracking spreadsheets up front and early, that really helps understand sponsor limitations. And then other things too is some of our sponsors have had availability to do parts of the work, right? So just understanding reimbursement rates, if you're gonna help clear and grub an area as a sponsor, how much value does that really produce for you? We've had sponsors that have cleaned channels and hauled material off as part of their match, but again, just being able to justify all that and then forecast that up front. It's really uncomfortable to be at the end of the project and your final partial pay request for the contractor and the sponsors out of match dollars, and we have to come up with cash to get that last payment request funded. So you know, the more forethought you can have in that and upfront, just planning and mapping and forecasting, that just helps everybody and eliminates some of those sticky situations.
One thing I'll add to Parker's comment, that was great, is that these sponsors, this is probably their first and maybe their only emergency that county commissioner is going to deal with, or that county administrator. And so there are experts, the NRCS understands their program. We need to go into that recognizing that to them, it's a very complicated situation. They're already dealing with everything that Parker mentioned on the property owner side and broadly for the county or for the sponsor. So stepping in and making sure we're educating them, making sure we say, it's fine, as a consultant, we can help you with the paperwork so you can get reimbursements or the matching funds. Let us show you on the spreadsheet ways that through your participation in permitting, in making arrangements with the property owner where these materials are the property in which the materials are found, making those materials available, you can create your 25% match. So showing them up front, kind of relieving some concerns, and they don't have to be the experts because there are experts involved in the process through the NRC with the NRCS folks and consultants.
Thanks, Darren. You know, there's usually that time when we finish our webinar and you as a presenter think, oh my gosh, I wish I would have said that. Darren, I think you just gave some great remarks there to help us with that. Jason, anything, final comments that might come before the group today?
No, just again, if you're an NRCS employee and you're having to deal with this PL5 or EWP, I would highly recommend getting a hold of the manual. You could reach out to me personally through chat. I could share the one that I have highlighted. You could run through mine. I'd be happy to help with any questions, and good luck.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Jenna, that one thing that you wish you would have said?
I think I've had my say.
Okay. How about it, Parker? Something that you wish you would have said? You're just remembering it now?
No, I think I added it in my last comment as far as, tracking match and forecasting and just helping the sponsors understand from a budget standpoint, how are they going to come up with 25%? And maybe just elaborate on that briefly is we've had like that $18 million project that I mentioned earlier, that was quite substantial, and the sponsors, each of them were looking at it like there's no possible way to come up with that match, both from in kind and cash. And we were fortunate, but also proactive as a whole, team, to get the state to actually appropriate some state funds for that disaster, and that counted as match. So again, just be proactive and think outside the box. And sometimes EWP is constant roadblocks. You're fighting a tough schedule, you're fighting emergency permitting, and some agencies, don't offer that opportunity. So there's constantly roadblocks, but stay optimistic and maintain the vision, and everything turns out really good in the end. And EWPs are success stories that change lives. It just sometimes doesn't happen as quick as we want it to.
Well, the constant reminder to always look at what does it look like when it's working like it should. So thanks for that. Eric, that one thing that you wish you would have said, here's your chance.
I'd just say amen to what Parker just said. Relationships are a great part of the process, and being able to have optimism and resiliency as you're working through these is important. And yeah, just don't forget that everyone's in on the team has different backgrounds, and they definitely have different ideas, and it's great to be able to pull those together to make a successful project. So thank you.
Thanks, Eric. And Tina, let's go to you for some closing remarks from our National Watershed Coalition chair.
Well, thanks everybody for taking time out of your day to join us. This has been really, really informative. A lot of great information that's been passed on. I look forward to seeing the activity on the website when we do get this recording up, and see how many times it might be visited or downloaded, or viewed. Thanks again for everybody's support and participation, and head to our website and join up.
Thanks, Tina. And Dan?
Ray, just to touch briefly on the funding conversation, I have a little sermon I give that says there's always money. And in actuality, if you think about it in terms of there are three types of funding, there's funding you have, funding you can get, and funding that you can influence the spending of that money. And that example was just mentioned about the tall hill that the sponsors had to climb, and then they were able to step in and get money appropriated from the state legislature that solved the problem and move the project along. So I would urge you to keep those three things in mind: money you have, money you can get, and money that you can influence the spending of. I would echo Tina's remarks. We appreciate Jones DeMille. We appreciate our NRCS brothers and sisters. I think the discussion and the questions on this have just been stellar, and some high level thinking and high level answers given. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. And with that, Ray, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Tina. To our professional presenters, thank you so much for the work and time you put into preparing for this. With that, then, we'll end this webinar, the National Watershed Coalition. Take care, folks.